Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Merksamer. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of PPIC, and on behalf of our board, some of whom are here today, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this third event in our 2023 speaker series on California's future. We're very happy to present this program today featuring California Attorney General Rob Bonta. As we all know, the Attorney General is the state's top lawyer and chief law enforcement officer. He is the first person of Filipino descent and the second Asian American to occupy this position. I was privileged to spend many years early in my career in the AG's office, and it was then, and certainly is now, the finest public law office in the country. And Attorney General Bonta, we are honored to have you as our speaker and our guest here today. Moderating the conversation with Attorney General Bonta is PPIC's dynamic new president and CEO, the former Chief Justice of California, Tani Cantil-Sakauye. So, thank you both. Look forward to the conversation in about a minute. And thank all of you for joining us today. We also would like to thank the sponsors of our speaker series. Their support makes it possible for these events to be free and available to the public. The sponsors are listed on the screens on my right and on my left, and also on our website. And so let's also give them a nice round of appreciative applause. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, which are groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Please visit the PPIC website to find information on how you can join, if you're so inclined, PPIC as a sponsor or a donor. So, before we begin, just a few very, very brief housekeeping items. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. At the end of today's program, there will be time to respond to audience questions. For those of you here in Sacramento, please raise your hand, and PPIC staff will come to you with a microphone. Please state your name and the organization you're affiliated with before asking your question. For those of you joining us virtually, and I understand there's a lot of people joining us virtually today, please send an email to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Be sure to also include your name and organization along with your questions. Our staff will be monitoring these questions that come in and incorporating them in as much as possible. So finally, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phone. So now on to the program. I'm pleased to turn this over to Tani to moderate today's conversation with Attorney General Bonta. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction, and thank you also to our sponsors. And we also have other PPIC board members here today. We have Cassandra Pai, and we have former PPIC President Donna Lucas also present with us. Thank you all. We are especially honored to have our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, here today. We are excited about the work he's done both in the Assembly as well as our State Attorney General. And we also have a series of questions, but we'll be taking questions from the audience as well as online. And true confession, I've followed Rob's career since he was a lawyer, first sworn in at my house, as well as his work as an attorney, and then in the Assembly, and now as Attorney General. Thank you so much for being here, Attorney General. I'd start off our first question with, what are the primary responsibilities of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice?
Thank you. Let me first say I'm honored to be here. Thank you to the PPIC for putting on this event and other events. Educate, inform, and have dialogue about important issues facing California, and super excited to be doing this with Tani, who over 2 decades ago swore me in at her home with pancit and lumpia and love as I started my career as an attorney. So if you're not happy with what I've done as an attorney, she's responsible for swearing me in. You can talk to her about that. And the Office of the California Attorney General is is broad and big and covers incredible amounts of ground, something that I'm really proud of. In this role, I am the Chief Law Officer for the state of California, Chief Law Enforcement Officer, and the People's Attorney. Our goal is to protect, support, and defend California's people, resources, and values, to make sure California is the best place to live, work, and raise a family, and to protect constitutional rights, civil rights, consumer rights of the people of California. If it sounds broad, it is. And the great thing about this job, the thing I like most about it, is on any issue and on every issue that Californians are facing that are important to them, we have a role. We have something to say. We have something to do. We can take action to address an injustice, right or wrong, fix a problem, provide a solution. And we are. So we're involved in everything from public safety, which is job 1, 2, and 3, to housing, gun violence, reproductive freedom, corporate accountability. The list goes on, addressing hate crimes, taking on fentanyl. And I know we'll talk about a lot of these, but on every issue that's important to California, as the Chief Law Officer, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, and People's Attorney, we're involved and we're active. And let me just say, sorry, we are the largest state Department of Justice in the nation. Not a surprise, we're California. We have almost 6,000 employees. We are $1 billion a year budget, and we leverage those resources in support of the people to solve those problems.
Thank you. It is a big job with lots of responsibility, and we read about your work regularly. In that vein, I just want to touch a little bit about your history. You were born in the Philippines. Your parents were part of the farm worker movement, and as we've talked today, you are the first of many. First Filipino in the Assembly, first Filipino Attorney General. How does your background affect your view toward public service and your approach to the justice issues you just described?
It's absolutely defining. It's in my blood. It's like the air I breathe. It's in my DNA. That history and legacy that my parents handed down to me of fighting for social justice, fighting for change, righting wrongs, confronting the injustice and making them right. And that's something I grew up with and has continued to inform me, inspire me, drive me forward. It's what I'm passionate about. I was born in the Philippines, and my parents brought me here to this state. I started my California story in Los Angeles because they looked out into my future in the Philippines, and they saw the end to freedom and democracy and human rights and civil rights and the rule of law, because a dictator was rising to power and did take away all those things. And so they brought me here to California to seek an opportunity and a better life. And we're active in creating better lives for others. My mom fought for the restoration of democracy in her home country for years until it was restored 15 years later. My parents worked for the United Farm Workers of America. I lived in La Paz. My dad worked in the front office with Cesar Chavez. My mom in the preschool with Dolores Huerta. They were fighting for the rights and dignity of farm workers, for a fair contract, for fair and safe working conditions. And my dad, as a grad student, went to Selma after hearing the voice of Martin Luther King Jr. on audio cassette tapes sent to him from across the country. He felt called to action to be part of this inflection point, this change point in our country, and went to organize for civil rights and for voting rights. And that is all a part of who I am and will always be. And it's how I see the role to fight for everyday people, to make their fights my fights, to make sure that the things that are the biggest problems in their lives that I can help with and support. And so, and then being the first, it's important whenever you're the first in a place that your community has never been, that you bring your values and your lived experiences and your authentic self, and that you see the communities that have been unseen and overlooked and undervalued, and you make sure that you fight for them and give them the dignity and respect that they need as well. And so that's my big vision of this role, to fight for the little guy, make sure they are protected and defended against the abuse of the big guy, to make sure everyone is seen, valued, heard, protected, that their rights and their fundamental civil rights and constitutional rights are a bedrock for their opportunity to pursue and hopefully achieve the California dream.
Thank you, Attorney General. Your history is really the history of California, and your family has lived that history for you to now be the Attorney General. given that history. Can you tell us a little bit about 2 or 3 of your top priorities?
Sure. You know, sometimes people think that when you're figuring out your top priorities, you sit in a room and in the sort of confines of that place and space and moment in time, you write them on a piece of paper and you rank them 1, 2, and 3. That's not how I do it. I think that the way priorities should be defined is a dynamic way, and it's based on what the most important challenges are facing our state at that moment. And so every leader takes their role in a moment in time, and that time is defined by the challenges, threats, attacks, and we're seeing all those things. We're seeing across the country extremism and division and attacks on rights and attacks on freedoms. When I became Attorney General, I didn't think one of my top priorities would be doing everything in my power to defend and protect reproductive freedom, bodily autonomy, and choice. But it is, because we had a Supreme Court decision that changed everything. And ended Roe versus Wade, stripped back for the first time in the history of the Supreme Court rights instead of expanding them. And we leaped into action to be what California needed to be at that moment. Not just a place where we're defending and protecting the reproductive freedom that already existed, but we were expanding it, putting a constitutional amendment on the ballot, making sure that we're defending our protections in state court, and supporting a whole set of laws that provided additional defenses and bulwarks to reproductive freedom. So that's one. Gun violence has always been a passion. Addressing gun violence and promoting gun safety has always been a passion of mine. And California is the state with the strongest gun safety laws in the nation, and also the state with one of the lowest firearm mortality rates in the nation. Those things are not accidental or coincidental, they are causal. One is because of the other. And we are defending those rights defending those protections in court when they're challenged. We have, just like with the Dobbs was to Roe, as Bruin is the same thing in the Second Amendment context and in the gun safety context. So we're staying constitutional and also being common sense and making sure that we're supporting our gun safety laws. Red flag laws work. Gun violence restraining orders work. We have an Office of Gun Violence Prevention that we've created to make sure that prevention is being used on the front end to stop gun violence, and that we're expanding the approaches that work, like the red flag laws, defending our universal background checks, assault weapons ban, large capacity magazine ban in court. So reproductive freedom, gun violence, and then there are others, and on any given day we could have a different set of top 3. But I'll say right now, housing. And I think this is something I'm very proud of, because I don't think people have thought as the California Attorney General and the Department of Justice as a place where you're making progress on addressing the housing crisis in California. We are. We created a housing justice team to enforce the laws of the state of California, laws that provide for streamlining and expedited building of housing, and opportunities for lot splitting and ADUs and by right ministerial approval of housing. And there are cities across this state that are not yet fully complying with all those laws, and they must, like any law. They're the laws of the state of California. They are not advice or counsel or suggestion. They are the laws. They're required to be followed. And it's part of a broader vision for the state of California, for every corner of the state, every jurisdiction, to participate in our collective solution, to contribute. No city has to do everything, but every city needs to do something. And if every city contributes and builds more units, we'll get out of this housing crisis together. And we're also protecting tenants from being evicted into homelessness. So reproductive freedom, gun safety, and housing.
Thank you. And as you said earlier in your statement about your approach, it is clear that much of your top priorities are top because of decisions that you may have thought were long settled or had now bring to your plate today in contemporary government. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about those later, but I wanted to ask you about a fact that the PPIC, our most recent statewide survey, around 3 in 4 of Californians, or approximately 75% of those we surveyed, said that violence and street crime are at least somewhat of a problem in their local community. Now, this 75% is up from our survey from 2 years ago. And so I wanted to ask you sort of, what are you doing to address crime at the Department of Justice?
Yeah. And so I mentioned earlier, public safety is job number 1, 2, and 3. So that occupies the upper echelon of what we do all day, every day at the Department of Justice. Housing reproductive freedom, gun safety are in the top conversation, of course, but after our foundational work addressing the public safety. So we are involved in addressing the biggest threats to public safety across the state, in short, and we do it as sort of more of a convener and a centralized role. We don't do patrol. Police departments and sheriff's departments do patrol across the state of California, and there's thousands of men and women in uniform who serve us every day and keep us safe and support our communities. And we work in partnership and we work in collaboration, and we look at the issues that we're taking on and putting our resources into the same way I look at all of our priorities. What are the biggest threats, the biggest challenges? And so among them are rising fentanyl crisis. We created a new fentanyl task force to address the threats to our community, the deaths to children and other community members throughout the state, to work on every level, interdicting fentanyl, stopping it at the borders, working with our federal partners, working with our local partners, and we're going to continue to lean into that space to address our rising fentanyl crisis, also seeing it as what it is, both a public safety issue and a public health issue, and taking it on from all sides where we can make progress and move the needle. Organized retail crime. We've been involved in some of the biggest investigations and takedowns and prosecutions of organized retail crime throughout the state of California, especially when it's multi-jurisdictional, moving across counties, sometimes across states, doing the investigations, and then with our partners as part of the CHP organized retail crime-led task force, and then bringing those cases in court and prosecuting. We have an incredible unit in our team called the Special Operations Unit, which uses sophisticated surveillance and investigative techniques to take down organized criminal groups that are involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and gun trafficking. And we've been part of some incredible joint takedowns across the state where we've saved lives, literally stopped mass shootings that we knew were about to happen before they happened, stopped murders in progress before someone could be killed or harmed. So really proud of our Special Operations Unit. We're addressing human trafficking for sex and for work across the state. We have task forces that work in San Diego, Sacramento, Central Valley, and we're also taking on hate crimes, a top priority. Too many people are being attacked, targeted, hurt, harmed because of who they are, where they're from, how they pray, who they love. And it's wrong, it's not who we are, and we're pushing back against the forces of hate. We're also seeing an alarming rise in hate crimes against all groups of people in the state, and so it's not right. It's got to stop, and we're fighting to make that happen.
Related to the survey regarding violence and street crime, we're hearing a lot about high-profile business closures as a result of crime, and most notably recently the Nordstrom retail, the center in San Francisco. I wonder, is the Attorney General involved in any way with some of the work that can prevent that kind of effect on the local economies?
We are, and we've been part of specific takedowns in the Bay Area of organized retail crime groups who were stealing from, Apple stores or other stores that were involved in some of what may be part of the consideration for some of our retail establishments making decisions about where they want to continue and how they want to continue forward with their business practices. So public safety is fundamental. Everybody wants it, everybody needs it, everybody deserves it. And working with our local law enforcement partners, we've really tried to address the environment that's been impacting not just our business environment, our business leaders, certainly them, but our entire communities when it comes to threats to safety, risks to property, loss, and following the data, I think, is always a good path. We know from research and data that the thing that stops is most likely to deter crime, is best located to deter crime, is the belief that you will be arrested if you commit crime. And so we need to arrest people. And when they commit crime, there needs to be accountability. The accountability needs to be proportionate to the crime. More serious crimes, more serious accountability. And so arresting folks and doing these takedowns and then prosecuting them consistent with the law and proportionate punishment and accountability has been an important part of course, ending the crime that those specific individuals are involved in, but also sending out a message of deterrence.
Yes, and I would note, too, that most people probably know this, but I'll just say it for purposes of just information. Your office also has special agents. And by when you say we're involved, you mean that your agents, your sworn officers from DOJ, are involved with local law enforcement on the task forces, on the streets, doing the work of law enforcement under the auspices of the Department of Justice. And at the same time, also, maybe not known just widely, is that your office regularly defends criminal convictions at the appellate level and the Supreme Court level by interpreting the law as it is applied to the conviction at hand. And that is a huge part of the work of DOJ, is it not?
It is. So at the DOJ, we have sort of two sides of the house, if you will, a civil side and a criminal side. And as you just mentioned, the criminal side has two major parts. We are responsible for defending all of the criminal convictions that local district attorneys and their teams get at the trial level, and then we handle the appeal. And then we have our own essentially law enforcement officers. They're special agents. Again, they don't do patrol. They're more involved in sophisticated, complex investigative roles and takedowns of criminal groups. And those agents work with law enforcement partners for force multipliers throughout the state and for greater impact.
Now, turning to something you mentioned earlier, housing. It's been a persistent challenge in California, you're aware, and one of our surveys says that 7 in 10, or 70% of California residents say that housing affordability is a big problem in our state. And I know you first created the Housing Strike Force, and I understand it's been rebranded as the Housing Justice Team. And so several questions related to that. What will it do? When will it do it? And what does success look like?
What it will do and when it will do it is, to answer the second question first, we're doing it now. We've been doing it since we set up the team over a year and a half ago. The rebranding is recent, but the work is ongoing and has been going for some time. And we seek to move the needle on the sort of 3 Ps of housing that will help us get out of our housing crisis: production and protection and preservation. We've been focused a lot on the production side, and that's probably been what's most public-facing to a lot of the state of California. The work that we've done with respect to Huntington Beach, for example, when they have flouted the laws of the state of California and not complied with them to build more housing in their city, or the city of Woodside, the town of Woodside, who sought to shoehorn themselves into an exemption by designating themselves a mountain lion sanctuary when they were not a mountain lion sanctuary, and our enforcement to say you can't get out of the legal requirements that impact your city by flouting them or pretending you're in an exception when you're not. And we've worked with other cities as well, Encinitas, Pasadena, and others. And the idea is to have cities participate in the solution. And so success looks like cities participating in the solution, building the units that they're required to build under their housing element or under the RENA numbers that apply to them, and doing their part, acting in good faith, following the law. That is success, and we are getting that success. We are winning in court. Our letters of notice of violation are being listened to. On Woodside, we got involved and we redirected them to be compliant with the law in the same day. And that was quick work, it was efficient work, and it was also work that was known to the rest of the state. We've seen that city council's members on the dais in public meetings are saying, we can't not approve this, or else California Attorney General and the DOJ might send us a letter of violation, or they might sue us. We need to comply with the law. And that's the message that we want out there, that the law is there to be complied with. And just do your part. You don't have to do everything, just do something. We're also working with protecting tenants, providing in-language notice of rights, working with landlords when they violate laws like the law I was a co-author with, AB 1482, which provided just cause eviction protections as well as anti-rent gouging protections for tenants throughout the state of California. We've gotten involved with companies like Wedgwood when they violated the law and hurt tenants. We've also been involved in anti-discrimination practices where there are practices that violate anti-housing discrimination laws and gotten jurisdictions and landlords in compliance with those laws. So success looks like following the law of the state of California and building more units, treating tenants consistent with law, not discriminating against tenants. There are multiple different factors and areas, a spectrum of places and spaces where we can make a difference, and we're trying to move the needle in all of them.
Did the rebrand, the changing of the name, mean something more in terms of, or more of a reflection of going to court and enforcing these laws that have been on the books?
It was interesting. It is more of that, sort of focusing on the just treatment of folks so that they're free of discrimination and free of violation of their rights and their tenants' rights, and also to show the enforcement in court and the justice that's being done in court when jurisdictions are required to follow the law. There were also some folks in this moment of extremism and division and rising violence, frankly, who felt strike force was too aggressive and not perhaps collaborative enough and focused on solutions that work for all of us. So we didn't want to offend anybody or have warlike or overly aggressive type of verbiage. So we were happy to rebrand in a way that captured the work and also addressed those issues.
Yes, and I would say strike force sounds a little bit temporal, but it really sounds by having the Housing Justice Department, you're really looking at long-term settling in of enforcing these laws that have been on the books for some time.
Absolutely.
You've talked several times about, and you gave some interesting numbers to us about gun violence, and I know you have a gun violence prevention office, and it was really the first in the nation. California leads in so many ways. What caused you to create that, given the numbers you've talked about, and what does success look like with gun violence prevention in California?
One of the great things about being a statewide constitutional officer is you get to go statewide and see the great work all throughout our state from different leaders who are innovating and making progress in different ways with different initiatives. And one of my visits brought me to San Diego and the San Diego City Attorney's Office, Mara Elliott, who has been the leader in the state on using existing red flag laws, gun violence restraining orders, and operationalizing them in her office by putting resources and deputy city attorneys, people who know how to build a case when they get information that indicates someone is about to harm someone else using a firearm, and secure a restraining order to prevent the harm and remove the weapons from that individual before they can harm someone. Over a third of the gun violence restraining orders in the state of California came from San Diego. Not because there was such a greater need there, it was just because they were utilizing more fully the tool. And we believe that more places in the state of California could benefit from that approach, from that practice. So we reached out to other jurisdictions. We held a workshop training them on how they can set up a team like the one in San Diego, and that can bring more prevention throughout the state. And we wanted to house that type of work in one place, that sort of taking a idea that's working and scaling it and bringing it to others who might not know about it. I've come to believe in, after being in elected office since 2007, that there's not that many brand new ideas. There's just really good ideas that aren't being used in certain places yet. And so bringing those ideas to the right place is important. And housing it in the chief law officer's Department of Justice, where those approaches can be housed, shared, trained, scaled, was really important. And stopping the violence on the front end, very important. There's ways to do it. California has identified many of them. Gun violence restraining orders, red flag laws is one. Universal background checks is another. Our armed prohibited persons system is another, where we know someone who has a gun and they're prohibited from having it, and we know where they live, and we go to their door, we knock on their door, and we move their guns before they can hurt somebody. That stops gun violence from happening in the first place. It's why we have one of the lowest firearm mortality rates in the nation. And so there's also ceasefire programs, peacekeeper programs, where there is strong intervention into a smaller group of individuals who are responsible for a large amount of firearm incidents. And if you can make a difference and disrupt and deter with those individuals, you can really lower firearm incidents. And Stockton cut theirs in half with this approach, and others can do the same. And we want to house that work in the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. So that's sort of the concept and the idea, bringing these ideas that work to prevent gun violence from happening in the first place, putting them in one central location and spreading them out to other places who can benefit.
That's really, really smart, I think. When we think of the Attorney General's office, we think of the Department of Justice. And when you think about that title, the Department of Justice, it's incredibly broad. It's broad shoulders to be the head of the Department of Justice. And so I say that because what you're doing, it sounds like, is looking at great programs throughout the state that have been working and then bringing it in, educating, replicating that model, scaling it for use in other places so that collectively, like you said, everyone's got to do something, that everyone is in fact doing something because they know what to do. Red flag laws are national. They've been around for a long time. And I have to say I'm really proud to see it being used more in California, reading more about its use in California. It will protect families. And as you also have pointed out, not only working with local entities about finding the programs that work in their community, but you're partnering with new communities. And I know you're partnering with the courts on those red flag laws because you can't, it's not just one entity that can remove a gun from a dangerous person. You need information, reliable information, then you need the order, and then you need the ability to execute that order. So hearing the gun violence prevention, which first in the nation, is really surprising, but of course California leads in so many ways, so that's very interesting. Thank you.
May I make another point that's related, and that is our, I just talked a little bit about sort of prevention on the front end. Most of the violent crime in the state of California, a firearm is involved, so anything that we do and everything that we do to reduce gun violence, prevent gun violence from happening, helps reduce crime. So does the back end, rehabilitation, successful reentry. And we are seeing, we have a new initiative in our office to really develop and work up successful reentry programs, scale them throughout the state of California. We have a high recidivism rate in the state of California, so folks are not coming back into communities after they complete their sentences, rehabilitated or prepared for successful reentry as often as they should. And there are programs where instead of having recidivism rates above 60%, they're in the single digits. And so what are they doing? They're providing opportunities for transformation and restoration and healing so that the individuals are able to be successful members of the community and never commit a crime again and actually participate in our collective success, with a job and paying taxes and civic engagement and voting. Organizations like Amity Foundation in LA are doing this very well with a smaller group of people, and if we can do it with a bigger group of people, and touch more lives, reduce the recidivism rate. It enhances public safety. It provides for, transformation and restoration for individuals, and it actually helps our economy as well.
Thank you. Well, this is an audience at PPIC with many foundations and the League of Cities and prosecutors' offices that are listening in to hear about these good programs and what's happening at the Department of Justice with these programs and how to get this information and how to scale it to make it work to keep your community safe. I know that it's been 2 years, I think, since you announced the creation, again, I think this might be a first in California, of a racial justice bureau to combat the rise of hate crimes, and we've seen that again most recently in the news. How would you describe what this bureau does and its impact so far?
The Racial Justice Bureau was something we developed in, I think, my second week in office after I was appointed. Over 2 years ago now. And it was designed to and meant to do a couple things. One, to have a large government entity call out racial injustice and plant a flag and say racial injustice exists. And we're going to take steps to address it and to right these wrongs. And it was also something that we developed at a time of rising hate crimes, when so many communities were in pain, looking for answers, struggling, anxious, worried to go out in public and do everyday things, including my own mother, who, Cynthia, who you know, who reached out to me, who demanded that she swear me in 1998.
Cynthia calls.
The answer is yes. The answer is yes when my mom calls. I thought that was just for me. I learned that's for everybody. My mom reached out to me, and there was worry and anxiety in her voice, and she was going to meet some friends in San Francisco coming from the East Bay, and she said, do you think I should take a transportation into the city? And I knew what she was asking. She was saying, I don't think I should. And I said, you'd probably be fine, Mom, but let's not take a chance. I'll take you. And that conversation has happened between families and loved ones so many times, and they shouldn't have to have that conversation. And we wanted to provide relief, a solution, a declaration of action that we would take. And racial injustice takes all sorts of forms. Thus, our Racial Justice Bureau takes a lot of different action in response. We're in schools where we're addressing approaches that have disparate impacts on young people, including expulsion policies and willful defiance policies. We're taking on hate crimes across the state. We're in the middle of, we had just had our 10th of 13 big city roundtables with mayors and community activists doing sort of what I just mentioned that we do with respect to gun violence prevention and rehabilitation efforts, identifying solutions, approaches that work, identifying the challenges in that community and how they're rising up and addressing the challenges. We've worked with district attorneys to encourage them all to set up hate crime units, to focus on hate crimes and work with impacted communities, help victims heal. We realized that over 50% of actual hate crimes were not identified or investigated as hate crimes, that they were swept under the rug. The sort of base crime was being investigated, but the hate component not. And that can be very painful for communities. Hate crimes are certainly a crime against an individual, but they're also a crime and an attack on a community. So we provided some guidance how to better investigate and identify hate crimes when they occur. We also created a community awareness response and engagement team to be at tables and in circles with community members, hearing from them, listening to them, co-creating solutions with them. And so our Racial Justice Bureau, and we're also investigating groups that are organized around hate and involved in criminal activity based on that hate towards another community. So I've been proud of that work. I think it's important to say what's true, which is that there is racial injustice in California. We must take it on. We must be intentional in our approach to it, and then to do the work, and to do the work wherever it is, and whatever the challenge might be.
Thank you. We reserve the next approximate 15 minutes for audience questions, but in the point that I may only get one more question, Mr. Attorney General, my question is this. We've been reading about constitutional officers and others declaring for a run at the California governorship. Some of us read over the weekend that you might be exploring rather seriously a particular run at the office of the governor. Is there anything you care to share with PPIC before we go into the audience?
Well, thank you for that question, Tani. I'm so glad you asked that. I do want to share this. I am in 4.5 months into my role as Attorney General, my first 4-year term. I'm eligible for 2 full 4-year terms. We have really important and consequential work to do. And as I mentioned, we have a broad sweep and a broad reach. And so we're focused on the work in 2023. And I think the people of the state of California need that, deserve that, want that, an AG who's on the case and working hard to address their challenges from housing to gun violence, reproductive freedom, public safety, hate crime, civil rights, constitutional rights, the list goes on. And that's what we're doing. We're focused on the work. I am honored, grateful to say that quite a few folks have reached out to me, encouraging me to run for governor. I will make a decision at some point, but that point is not now. Now is the time to be the best AG I can be and fight for Californians in every way I can.
Well, you know, at PPIC, we'll be watching. We now turn to that portion of our engagement today where we ask you to pose your questions to the Attorney General. And in the back, we have runners from our PPIC folks who have microphones to bring to your table so that we can all hear your question. This is also true for our online audience for questions as well. I still have questions, but this is the part traditionally where you get to be involved. And so please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you as soon as we can. Our runners are coming up to the table. Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. I'm Karen Anghusen, and I'm here representing the League of Women Voters of Placer County. The League's committed to open and participatory government. And while we recognize that elections are the purview of the local counties, we all know that there are instances of threats and unsafe conditions. And I'm wondering what role the state attorney general has in ensuring that our elections are safe.
Thank you. You're right in your initial observation about the local officials largely being responsible for the implementation of the existing laws of the state of California when it comes to elections and protecting the rights of voters. We have a Bill of Rights for voters that must be protected and that our local officials know about. Also, our Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, my former colleague in the legislature, we came into the legislature together. We talk about these issues and work on these issues when there's things like a county who's saying we're not going to have voting machines anymore because they're Dominion voting machines, and they believe the election denying lies about the machines. They need to have a system where they can have a free and fair election. And so we got involved in that county immediately. When there are, every election we have some of our team members are DAGs, Deputies Attorney General, that are on site at polling places, addressing what you just said, that there's not electioneering or voter intimidation or rights being violated. They're watching, they're looking, they're identifying solutions and trying to fix them in real time when they occur. So, like many of the things that we do, it's a process of partnership, collaboration, working together, where we can bring our resources, our expertise, our interest to these spaces and work with other officials who co-occupy that same space, and we can team up and work together. So we are very worried about, I am very worried about election denying, free and fair elections, gerrymandering, voter intimidation, laws that prevent people from voting. In California, we have some of the best laws for voting that bring the fundamental right to vote, that constitutional right, closer to Californians without barriers and obstacles in between, and allow folks to participate more readily and more easily and more conveniently. And we will protect and defend that in California. We have a model that I believe if others in the nation had it, we'd have greater integrity and more participation, and the will of the people would be expressed more readily and more accurately throughout the state and the nation.
Good afternoon. My name is Genoa Barrow, and I'm a senior staff writer for the Sacramento Observer. Hopefully you read the story I recently did on your wife and her work in the Assembly. But my question is really related to California prisons. California is, is closing a number of prisons and reimagining a number of others. What are your thoughts on the state of California prisons and their effectiveness?
I think that the reimagining work, the self-reflection, the looking at the data and going where the data guides us is important. That I think the final R in CDCR, which stands for rehabilitation, needs more priority, emphasis, investment, commitment, and there are ways that that can happen. I think we need to look back and ask ourselves, not what are we doing so we can continue to do it, but what have we done that works? What have we done that hasn't worked, and double down on what's working. And always have to be open to change and to what the data says, and to not predetermine it. And of course, we need accountability. We have a state and a society of laws. We believe in the rule of law. When the law is broken, there must be consequences and accountability. And the fact is, most people who are convicted of a crime and are given a sentence are going to be released at some point. Some point. Unless you have life without parole, LWOP, or a death sentence, you're coming back to the community. The only question is, in what state? With what capacity to contribute and be successful? And providing a pathway so that those who come back after serving their sentence, after doing their time, after fulfilling their obligation, are able and ready to be successful. And how we do that, where we do that, is important. I think one important reimagining we already have imagined, we just need to scale it, which is that towards the end of a sentence, the last 6 months, the last 12 months, maybe the last 18 months, it's served in a place where you are building the ability to be successful upon reentry. That you're not given gate money and a good luck after your sentence is over and on your own to find a job, find housing, find a community, find family members, but that you or find healing to any root causes that led you to be where you are. But that is done as it's being done with some of our reentry programs that the state has invested in and that are being expanded, as with the Amity Foundation, where you're getting anger management, you're getting drug rehabilitation, you're getting mental health, you're getting job training, you're getting a job, you're getting housing, you're with the community. And with that, you're on a pathway to success. So I think that's an important part of the reimagining as well.
Thank you. We have an online question, I believe. Stephen?
Thank you. This comes from our online audience. This is about Senate Bill 793 on flavored tobacco products from 2020. And this is from Lori Bremner of the American Heart Association. And she writes, I would like to first thank Attorney General Bonta for addressing efforts to undermine SB 793, which involve creating newly flavored tobacco products that declare on their packaging that they are unflavored. I would like to ask what the next steps are to address the issue of distributors illegally selling these falsely labeled flavored products in California.
We've been involved in that space since the passage of 793, and we were also involved in taking on big tobacco at the U.S. Supreme Court recently. And whenever there's a new law, there are efforts to design around it that may still violate it, or maybe lack of compliance with it where there's violation. And so we've sent out some letters and notices asking manufacturers to explain why they believe they are in compliance with existing law when it comes to flavored tobacco. There are new products, they're sort of referred to in some cases as edge products with that maybe the manufacturers and distributors don't think are flavored, but many others do. And so it's our role to help get to the bottom of it, to see if there's a violation or if there's compliance, and we're working through that process right now. But a lot of the advocates who help get us to where we are, where We have really reduced chronic illnesses from smoking and from tobacco in California. We've taken some of the most aggressive steps in the nation. I'm thankful for all those organizations, and we're going to continue to work in partnership. We think we do our job best when we work with leaders who live and work in this space every day and do our part, our role to enforce and identify any violations. So we're awaiting some of the information that will come from our request to explain why they believe they're in compliance, and we'll take further action as necessary.
Thank you. We have hands up, and we'll bring you a microphone. Where are we? Go ahead. Whoever has the microphone. Oh, go ahead. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lynn from Cal Matters. You and the DOJ pledged to investigate police killings of unarmed civilians and to close cases within a year. But families are waiting much longer than that. And so can you speak a little on the delay and what your office is doing to investigate these cases in a timely manner?
Absolutely. Maybe just a little bit of background. When I was a legislator, I was a co-author with Assemblymember Kevin McCarty from Sacramento on a bill called AB 1506, which required that the California Attorney General, it was Javier Becerra at the time, but it relates to whoever is in the role at the DOJ, conduct independent investigations of officer-involved shootings that result in the death of an unarmed Californian. So those were the qualifiers. And on average, there's about 40 a year. There have been actually less since I've been in office. And AB 1506 was implemented and is being implemented under my watch as Attorney General. So we created a team, we created guidance on what's a qualifying incident, what's not. We have to work with local law enforcement on these issues and in partnership and collaboration, as we always do, to make this successful. They have to know what's a qualifying incident so they can call our team to roll out to the scene, to work on the investigation, and then once we do the investigation, the forensics, the witnesses, et cetera, then there's a prosecutorial team which looks at the evidence and makes a decision on whether we're going to prosecute or not. Our goal has always been to get these done within a year. It's very important to get these done right, to be accurate and comprehensive and thorough. And we want to get it done efficiently, expeditiously, fast, when we can. More important to get it right than fast. But the goal is to get it done right and fast. And people who know me know that I like to do things quickly and deliver the results and get it done. And I try to pace it, I try to push, and to get results as soon as we can. And so for the cases that we've had, I think the first couple that we resolved and provided public announcements on were a little over a year. And perhaps not unexpected when you're doing this the first time. Anything you do more than once and with repetition, you're able to do it better, able to do it faster, and so we're in that process now. It took some time to work out some of the kinks and get through some of the hiccups, and we're moving more rapidly now, and we're doing a couple things that haven't been done before. One is we're looking at the individual incident to see if there's a violation of the law and if there's a criminal prosecution is appropriate. We have a standard of we believe we can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury, which is a high standard, and that's the standard in criminal law. And we also write a very thorough report about the incident that talks about the incident, the findings, the facts, our legal analysis, but it also does another thing that's required under the law and that we're happy to do because it's important. It provides guidance, suggestions on different tactics, on different approaches. We have a whole set of best practices that we believe should be implemented in law enforcement agencies, and when they're not being followed and they have had some relation to the incident, we advise those law enforcement agencies to adopt those practices. So we're going to get faster over time. For those who've lost somebody and are awaiting a response, they're right to be frustrated and to want the information as soon as possible, and we're working our best to get that to them.
Thank you. The last question goes to Ms. Veal Hunter, time-wise. Last question.
Okay. Carolyn Veal Hunter. I'm a lobbyist, but also volunteer treasurer to the California-Hawaii State Conference of the NACP, and first want to thank you for your lifetime membership. Today is their day at the Capitol, and two of the issues that they're going to be, two legislative issues that they're really focusing on are racism in high schools, as well as racism in high school sports, racism in schools in general, and racism in high school sports. Is there room for the Attorney General to be engaged in that discussion? We've seen, especially some of the high-profile stories we saw about bullying kids on the sports field.
There is, and sort of back to my original comments about almost every issue, there's a role for the California Department of Justice to play. If there's a law for the state of California, whether it be constitutional or statutory, that applies in a certain situation, we have the ability to potentially enforce, but also to declare and to remind that certain laws apply in this certain situation. They may not be something that an entity or an individual is thinking about at that time, but if there is especially if there is a systemic or structural occurrence or activity that is systemically and structurally violating people's rights, we put out law enforcement bulletins or guidance that provide guidance for these spaces about what can be done, what violates the law, what complies with the law, and so it puts entities on notice. So this could be a place where we would provide such guidance and say, these practices over here, they violate the law. They violate constitutional rights and statutory rights and civil rights of students. But here are other things that you can do that would be compliant. And so that guidance would be out there. So engagement is important. We need to know more about the scenario, the facts, the circumstances, the individualized conditions of what's happening, and then we can provide that guidance.
Thank you. So, Mr. Attorney General, we have a number of hands up, but we have come to the end of our time together. We thank you very much for your frank and thoughtful answers today and for teaching us all more about the good work you are doing. Thank you for your time, sir. A round of applause.
Thank you.
Also, today, we thank our sponsors for whom none of this could happen. We thank the PPIC board for making this happen, for PPIC employees and staff here. Please, all of you from PPIC, just stand up so people know the work this nonpartisan think tank does. Just the staff and the support. And we look forward to seeing you at our next speaker series events. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.